Hi, my name is Matt Cox. I am the Chief Customer Officer for vitagroup, and I'm also Director of openEHR International. And this is the last session, barring the closing remarks from Rachel. So I'm very happy and very pleased to be welcoming in a minute a lively bunch for the final panel and debate. So if you've got questions that have been burning you over the last 2 days, now is the time to ask those questions, some of the big thinkers here. So just about me, I've been in big data and digital programs for the last 25 years. I've worked across defence, public health, utilities, banking and elsewhere. And every challenge you have comes back to data and the way that you use it. And I'm privileged enough in the last 10 years or so, been working in public health, analytics on child protection, disease surveillance. And I had a history of being a lecturer in Singapore on C++ programming. So I have enough to fake technical stuff, but I will not try to go anywhere too far in it. But the panel are good. There are experts. They're strategists, and they're also deep knowledge thinkers on the real technical challenge of standards. I'm very pleased to have them all together. So I'll just ask, first guest to welcome to the stage is Grahame Grieve, father of fire. Grahame's the founder of the Global Fire Standard and the Fire Product Director of HL7, where he leads the fire core team and oversees the specifications, development, community governance, global partnerships, and he's closely involved in the ongoing collaboration. Forming, storming, norming, and performing Grahame.
Hi, Matt.
Put your hands together. Thank you. Next up, we have Kate Ebrill with 20 years leadership in health delivery and standards implementation. Kate leads clinical terminology, fire products to the Australian eHealth, and we heard a very, very energetic speech this morning, which we really enjoyed, at the research centre of the CSIRO, where she drives national and global adoption of interoperability standards through her involvement with Spark Australia. Can I please welcome Luke Readman to the stage? He's a strategic thinker, has been the driving force in the UK around a lot of the strategy work around share care records and bringing together system leaders in his area in London, known affectionately as the mafia boss of London, Luke Readman. Can I also welcome Heather Leslie, Principal of Atomica Informatics and openEHR CSIRO. Heather is an experienced clinician informatician with a long history of involvement in international digital health standards, an extensive expert in clinical information modelling, clinical governance, data quality, long list, and engagement with clinicians and domain experts. As part of her work on data standardisation, Heather is closely involved in international and national e-health programmes and also involved with Australia's Spark programme. Heather Leslie. And last but certainly not least, Ian McNicoll, a former GP. Ian has 30 years' experience in healthcare informatics. He's the director of openEHR Foundation Board and previously the chair of the openEHR Management Board. Was director of the Installation Board from March 19 until November 22. As CIO and founder of freshEHR, Ian continues the work and prompt openEHR technologies. He's also got me out of many tight spots on projects and programs, so I'm privileged to have worked with Ian for many years, and yeah, it's great to see you all. Okay.
One, two, three. It's the mafia connections.
Okay. Hello. Can you hear me?
I don't think mine. Oh, mine is.
Hello. Sorry. That's a mic drop. We need to wait that to the very end. Thanks, Ian. Good night. Okay. So, before we started, we thought what topics might come up, and actually over the last 2 days, I'll categorically say that a lot of the things we thought we were going to talk about actually have gone into real deep discussions, and that I think is fantastic. For my reflections are the sheer different use cases that are now currently being used, being implemented, being designed in collaboration community is actually phenomenal. From clinical trials we heard about this morning, to using voice to text and AI, we're looking at the way that applications are built in a flexible way using AI to looking how we actually store models. We looked at different countries now that perhaps wouldn't have been thinking about it a few years ago, from countries across Europe and much wider internationally, regions that are in procurement, are already going live, they're running pilots. And I think also the methods of delivery is changing. The ecosystem here, and we heard a bit from Niels earlier about the HIP platform, the ecosystem, but the ecosystem itself is growing, and the vendors are coming to this community asking to help solve problems more so than perhaps we've seen a couple of years ago. So the first question I'd like to ask the panel, I'm going to ask this to Grahame, if that's all right with you, Grahame. It feels as though momentum is building, and over the last 12 months, what has changed?
Right, so I do agree that momentum is building, and it's partly a cumulative expectation of success that we have been getting better at reproducing consensus building processes across the board. We're getting better at mastering using social media, but realistically, everybody's expectations on pace is lifting because of AI. It's like a rocket, under everybody. And I think that's the primary case. A few long-term initiatives have come together that are driving sudden acceleration in Europe, around EHDS, for instance, making a difference. And also, I think there's a certain change in the wind in a certain country that's galvanised people in particular directions.
Panel? Who'd like to go next? What's changed in 12 months?
I think certainly within Australia and locally, there's that real focus around the need for access to information, access to data. So with the work of the Digital Health Agency around modernising My Health Record, the work around looking at the Health Information Exchange, we've flipped them thinking about documents and exchanging documents around how it should truly put data in the hands of the consumers, supporting consumers with better access through things like the My Health app, and clinicians are expecting more. Clinicians actually want information that they can do something with and data that they can use. So I think it's definitely the drivers from our national strategies, the national infrastructure development. I think AI's put the spotlight on the need for data, the need for better data quality, and certainly within our country, the need to have a sovereign data capability that is ethical and complete and inclusive of the Australian population as well. So I think we're now really starting to think about, we need this information, and this information needs to be in a way that we can use it.
Okay, thank you. Luke?
Yeah, thanks. So I think what's happened is trust. So, we often see, don't we, in lots of different industries, lots in healthcare, of smaller groups starting things off all over the place. But what we've seen, I think, in the last 12 months is the coming together of a number of scaled delivery of open-air underpinned programs that are delivering benefit, and that is being seen. And that is building trust. It's building trust with our commissioners who pay for these sorts of things. It's building trust with the people who use them, clinicians and others. And it's building trust, most importantly, with our publics. And I think it's that trust that then drives further adoption, that drives this sort of expectation curve in the way you've described. And I think it's the thing which we need to hold dear to our hearts, that in whatever position in the world or in the system we work, we every step we take it to build trust, not to destroy trust.
It's really true. This is like a lens looking into all the work going on in the world, and yet it's one moment in time on a yearly basis. And so all the things we saw today, how does that go out into the community, that people who aren't here, who aren't exposed to it? Because you're right, it's the value and the outcomes you get off the back of it. And there's some amazing projects over the last 2 days that we've seen. Heather.
I'm going to say cultural change. And I'm seeing that from the point of view of having had 20 years of fighting to evangelise, really, the open-air side of things, and seeing the opacity between each of the different standards organisations. The last 2 years especially, but mostly the last 12 months, to see the standards organisations working together. But it's not only at a standards level, it's at the people involved, and so especially from Spark, I think it's really accelerated things, and it's really shone the highlight on the fact that we are now able to get clinicians engaged actively and being validated, basically, recognise that they have some skills to bring, we've got a methodology to bring, and then that is informing the technical side. That's also been a barrier for a long time, getting clinician engagement, and number one, getting them involved and getting them excited, but also getting it listened to. And I think that that's something that's really changed, especially in the last couple of years, but certainly Sparked, to me, has just changed that whole dynamic and shown how that changes everything else.
Great, thank you. Ian?
Yeah, I guess maturity. What we're all trying to do is really, really hard. And when people from outside the domain ask, why is this hard? Well, it is really tough. And we've got to think of this a bit like net zero. This is a multi-generation, multi-decade thing. We will not solve these problems overnight, even though we've made massive progress. But I think we've reached a level of maturity, completely agree with Heather, that's a cultural maturity. But, just reaching out, we can see that there's really lots of cool things happening in fire. And they're going, there's cool things in open air. And our ability to say, hey, why don't we just use each other's technology, each other's tooling, each other's methodologies, not to stop doing what we are good at, but to enhance what we are. And I think it's that maturity of thinking, but also technology tools, and in the market, where people are now actually thinking, as Luke said, look, we can see this working.
Great. Just one small follow-up question. Is government leading this, industry leading this, or somewhere in between? Because sometimes standards have come more out of industry's necessity and real evangelist individuals. Is there a movement towards government leadership on this? Luke, you're smiling.
There's lots of rhetoric from government, right? Whether there's any real understanding, I think, is a different question. I think this is a community-led thing. I think we've got to value that, as I said. We've got to nurture that, because if we can demonstrate that we can deliver at scale on the big questions that are facing us, and the public are satisfied and want more of it, then governments will listen to us. Okay, it's when there's an absence of that, governments start to step in and impose things, and we get into this cycle of failure.
I think it has to be both, and I think that's what and not just industry and government, it's consumers, clinicians and industry and government, and it's keeping that in balance, that we're staying consumer focused, person centred. Clinicians have to be at the table and leading this and making sure it adds value. It has to be industry driven because they're the ones going to implement, but it also has to align with government policy. And it's about keeping those things in balance so we can actually go forward together. So yes, clearly I'm a big believer of bottom-up collaboration and community-led. I'm all about community, but I think the government has to be there authentically, actively participating as part of that community, because at the end of the day, they will help complete the sustainability in terms of providing the right policy levers behind it as well. But if you don't keep it in balance, we're not going to get the end game.
Can I just add to that, that I think it's actually government is starting to learn how to do it differently with Sparked. And I think that's the thing. It's not the traditional top-down imposition. They're actually letting go a little bit, giving us some leeway to be able to do things community up, and then working out how they can actually engage with that to actually make it work better.
Okay, great. Thank you. I think there are pockets all over where different absolute amazing leadership comes forward. In Catalonia itself, that was top down into the system to drive it, and elsewhere it's a different method based on each country, so it does differ. Slight tangent. Oh, Grahame, were you going to?
Yes, I was going to say that it doesn't matter where I look in the world, if the government isn't driving it strategically, it does not happen. How it plays out and how much it's delegated varies wildly, but if the government isn't driving, then nothing is happening in every country I've been in.
Government can stifle it as well, though?
Oh, yeah, totally. I'm very good at doing that.
Great, thank you. We'll take a slight step to another topic. So how can we accelerate the building of capacity, collaboration and community? Many programs and projects here over the last 5 years or so were always constrained, not necessarily by the high experts, the super users. It's the volume of those that are actually doing the day-to-day work, and how do we build that? And Sparked is a great example. It's wonderful to hear that this morning. But how do we accelerate the building of that capacity, collaboration, and community? And I'm going to go with Ian on this one.
I knew you were going to make me do that. It has to be good comms. So, Luke very much led the One London and the Universal Care Plan that we've been involved with. And it has been a genuine pleasure. One of the things they've got absolutely right is great comms. They advertise what's happening, lots of good social media posts. It just sends such a great message. And the more we can do that, the more we can publicise that this stuff actually works. I think it's a new field we're all in, which is standards-based system development. And I'll leave what you regard as a system, keep that vague. That doesn't mean it's a single system, but it's all driven by standards, and it's new. But if we can show it proves and we can communicate the successes to society, we'll move faster.
Okay. Kate.
Where do you start? I think you have to actually and I think where Sparked has built momentum was truly embracing that philosophy of community and openness and transparency. So a lot of people talk about community, a lot of people talk about consultation, co-design, engagement, but they don't truly authentically believe that we're about scaling a community, that we're about embracing and every voice being at the table. And having that massive trust from the Federal Health Department to say, no, let's actually create an open, collaborative program. Let's put CSIRO in place in that partnership of the 4 organisations I talked about earlier to build that community. And without that trust and without the government embracing it and enabling it, I don't think we would have progressed as far as we did. And I think it's really about, which is where I agree that we do need government direction, but we do need allowment of the community to grow and build, and to be open and to think about all the different ways that you have to engage with people and encourage people that you don't have to be an expert to be in the room. You don't have to be an expert in standards. You don't have to be technical. We need some of those people, but we need to be able to engage in multiple different ways to make sure we're bringing everyone on the journey with us. And that's how we start to grow, is to start to, have people come along, get value, then they invite their friends, and then you keep growing from there. But you have to maintain that openness, that trust, that true collaboration all the way through, because that community will equally collapse as quickly as it has grown if in any way we don't maintain that trust and the openness that we started with.
I'm going to tell you a little bit, a very fire-specific perspective on this, but 7 or 8 years ago, we agreed that HL7 was not able to deliver on the US government agenda because we didn't have anybody who knew how to build specifications. Now we have a very active community that's very large, that knows how to build specifications, and HL7 is pumping them out at an astonishing rate, but we don't have the implementers. The vendors simply can't do the work. And we're in the same place with Sparked now. Sparked is running really nicely, starting to produce specifications. But who's actually going to do this? Vendors only have, in Australia, vendors only have 1 or 2 people each that can do this stuff when they're flat stick. And so, we are running up against a workforce limitation. And around the world, everywhere I go, workforce limitation. I was virtually attending from another meeting, a G8 meeting, and one of the ministers of a country, which I won't name, got up and said, "We don't have a workforce issue." His tech lead was sitting next to me and said, "The hell we don't. We don't have workforce." Here's a radical idea for you. The problem is that we use the word health informatics, and students have zero idea what on earth that is and don't sign up for it. And we need 10 times as many students coming through, and we need 10 times as many employable developers that understand healthcare and healthcare people that understand IT. But as long as we keep doing healthcare informatics, nobody's going to do it, because who knows what that is.
That's a really good point. We're going to ask a couple more questions, then we'll open out to the floor. So get your gnarly questions sorted, please. So I'm going to ask down the line, and if you're end of the line, you're lucky because you've got time to think about it. So Ian, sorry. If you could solve one practical problem in standards, what would it be?
Ooh.
Practical.
Very practical. Geeky. Pre-coordinated codes coming in from systems. How do we get things to be, what I mean by that is sitting systolic blood pressure, as one code, and that really has to go to 3 different places. That would be something I'd love to solve.
Thanks, Ian. Heather.
I just, my head goes straight to my day-to-day work. It's getting the foundational data right. Not small, not simple, well, it's practical, but massive. And I think the first time I saw an archetype was 2004. There were 2 archetypes in existence. We've now been growing them. It's been a long, slow burn. But what we're doing is using that ontology and all of the things that have come through the specs to help us create this data ecosystem. And to me, that is the jumping off point for everything else from a clinical point of view. So if we get the little data right, it's not just recording the data, it's also being able to get decision support standardised and right. It's querying, it's reporting, it's our College of GPs puts out a Word document that describes best practice for how to stop smoking, but it's all words. And it's like, well, now we're all using digital systems. How can we actually say this is the way to record it best? We've got assessment tools that have been built 20 or 30 years ago that made good sense at the time, that are, they're good people who know exactly what they're doing. They've been validated. They need to be used as evidence-based assessments for aged care, for example, but they've got no relationship to current data. And so this, to me, is where we get a huge change. If we, archetype by archetype, each one that's published is starting to create that kind of ecosystem, and the flow-on effects from that is absolutely, it's just huge, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Thanks. So, I think it's all about people, this sort of problem, right? And as we bring together data from different places, either because we're accessing it on the fly in a distributed way or creating, larger pools of data, it starts to challenge some of our legislative and sort of principles about using data for different purposes. But we need to believe and understand our public, because when we have very open conversations with the public, they expect that we use this data for these purposes. They expect that we have a fairly set of standard governance rules which tells them what we're doing with their data and asks them for permission to use their data in certain ways. But when we go up the chain, to quote from a chap yesterday who was speaking, we have red light lawyers and green light lawyers, and sometimes I feel we've got too many red light ones. We don't have enough people saying, how can we help you get there? We've got rather too much of people saying, stop, you can't go any further unless we change legislation. And I do think we need to think about that.
Thank you.
I think the biggest thing we need is a clear roadmap around adoption. Too quickly, we go for ministerial imperative and we go for the low-hanging fruit, the quick wins, and sometimes we need to take a breath and realise that if we actually get some clear foundations right, and whether that's around archetypes and around fire and the rest of it, get some clear foundation right, we can actually run faster. So it comes back to that workforce challenge. Industry can only do so much. A lot of the time it's like industry doesn't want to do this, it doesn't want to adopt standards, it doesn't want to move. No, sometimes it's just there's so many competing pressures, there just isn't enough capacity to actually go as fast. And whether that's industry delivering as quickly, whether that's change within organisations and clinicians. So getting some agreement around what's the most important, what's that roadmap, start and build from there without trying to go for the low-hanging fruit. And actually just get the foundations right.
So, the problem with this question for me is mostly when I look at something in the standards and say, well, that's not good, that I can mostly fix it. But there's one that I can't, and it's just the 6 of us, nobody else is listening. And so I decided I'm going to tell the truth, which is that the one thing that I failed to do is fix SNOMED.
In a backwards way, that was what I was trying to say, Grahame. I just did it more subtly than you.
They won't lose many friends because everybody already knows.
That's great, thank you. Well, there's 5 challenges here for everyone. So I look out, and most of you are bright, so please find the challenge you heard there, technical, policy, vendor, and delivery, and let's have a think about it. Can we open questions to the floor, please? Oh, hand shot up very quick.
John.
Or have I stole the mic?
John, you've got a big voice. Just get up and go.
This came from the digital wallet question I have, so I have a question for all of you. It came from the digital wallet discussion that was earlier today, and so it's a question I have for all of you around the ethics of standards. Where, something I hadn't even thought of, but Grahame brought up in the US where, exposing some data can be problematic if you're going state to state, and you think of some countries, whether it is that, as a Canadian, that neighbor of mine to the south, whether it be China with some other oppressive places, where we're thinking of, from a standards organization, from openEHR, of exposing all of this data to make it better for patients to have care, and Kate talked about a patient-centric focus of patients owning their data. What do you think are, as a standards organization, openEHR, HL7, SNOMED, all these ones, where does the ethics of what we're doing, where does that come into play? Do we have to think about that when we're creating our standards?
So, in our public deliberations, we had a lot of conversations with the public about what were the principles they wanted us to use when using data about them. And so we got into these ethics questions with them. And actually, they're far more liberal than we would expect when we as a group get together and have these conversations, because we're far more challenging with each other. And I think we need to listen to our publics. And I would say to this community, maybe we need a line of discussion with our publics to help inform the thinking of this community to go forward. Otherwise, I really do think we may be too constrained in our approach to this. So that we need to have what's the management method that finds a different sort of politics, that finds us a way through this? And I would say speak to our publics and have an open conversation with them.
I also think standards allow us to be much more privacy positive and think about it in that way too. We have implementations around data that's extracted from GP systems for secondary use. And no GP or consumer would really understand how that data is being extracted and being used, because it's just extracting free text data, which could have a lot of re-identifying or identifying information within it, because there is no way to extract that in a structured format and use that for population health use. Now we're through starting to define these data standards, now looking at maybe bulk fire in terms of extract from those GP systems, we can actually be much more privacy positive. We can uphold the data sovereignty principles of what data is being extracted, for what purpose, and where is it going. So I think it's about thinking about how these standards can actually improve it. It's all the rest of the governance that needs to put around it, the privacy frameworks, the consent frameworks around managing that data that needs to be put around it. But through having the use of the standards, I actually know what data I'm talking about. And I think going into this AI world as well, we need to have, and comes back to, do we need a sovereign AI capability in Australia? Do we need data that's representative of the Australian population? To get that data, we want to use these standards to start to improve that data quality. So I think it has a role in improving the ethical use of data if we do it right with all the right safeguards around it.
Yeah, the underlying architecture in One London, UCP, Luke doesn't actually know this, I don't think, was actually built around a concept that we worked with a few years ago called the co-produced record, which is a recognition that it can't just be the patient's record. And philosophically it is, but these are joint co-produced records. Professionals have rights, patients have rights. In a sense, the idea was, let's bring patients in as co-professionals, but they work in our world, they work on records that are held to a medical legal standard, because that protects everyone. One of the ideas we played around with was how we could make those as kind of sovereign data stores, but built on good, strong medical legal principles. I'm not sure it ever really solves the problem of hostile governmental actors, without completely compromising what Luke said. You know, most of us, when things get tough, we need to share our data. And sadly, that is not, that can be in conflict with those hostile actors, and I'm not sure there are really easy solutions to that. But Graham's giving me a funny look, so maybe he's figured it out.
I'm not giving you a funny look. You know, I'm always game for giving Sean a funny look. One of the things that we have really strong exposure to in HL7 is Western perceptions of privacy and security and safety. When I go to Africa, they're talking a really, really different language around communal family care and wanting to know, why don't you care about us? And I, after my first trip to Africa, and they shirt-fronted me on this, I actually pushed HL7 to ensure that family medicine, that family care, that communal care was covered. And it was a battle within HL7 to get people to agree that this was valid, because we're so ensconced in a Western perspective of what we think is important around privacy and security and so forth. And part of that is around, to get to the heart of Jean's questions around ethics, is what are we doing and how many stakeholders do we need to have? And you know, one of my personal campaigns within HL7 is to make sure that in every model, that in every place, that in every workflow, that every clinical process that we model, that we consider and cater for the patient's primary carer. So often they're just a hole in the record that everybody knows they're important, but nobody explicitly makes them important. And it's an ongoing process to get everybody in HL7 to think about that. But more generally, I spoke with the policy committee at HL7 in our last HL7 meeting and asked them to actually prepare a statement of ethics. Now, a few years ago, I wrote a code of conduct for HL7 for the community, which was then adopted by HL7 as a formal code that everybody in the community has to agree to. It's a very standard code of conduct, but now I'm asking the committee to move to step up and write a code of ethics. And then we will actually actively review all our specifications against the stated code of ethics. Have you catered for teenagers? Have you catered for domestic violence? Have you catered for elderly people who can't use computers? Is there a space for them? And that plays out really differently, and a lot of them it's irrelevant for some of our specifications, but the idea is to actively review, and that seems like an appropriate thing for openEHR to do as well, to say, this is our statement of ethics, everything is checked. Maybe mostly it's a pro forma, not relevant, but still we should check that we catered for these things and didn't forget something, because very often the people who are forgotten are the people who won't be able to raise issues.
Thank you. I think one thing of ethics is that it's a layered response. The data and standards has a role to play, but so does the RBAC and ABAC and the rights and controls that go over the data helps protect that information that's sensitive. And the role end-to-end for everyone in the room is how do you design that end outcome that's going to manage ethics.
And in as much as HL7 and openEHR design capabilities, we should make sure that the capabilities desire what's needed, deliver what's needed, so the users can have it when they need it.
And I think that's what I was going to say. Generally, I am lazy as far as the ethics of designing the data. I'm designing the data to be as complete and as universally useful and usable and appropriate and correct. But that said, you know, things like sex and gender causes all sorts of issues, and in places that I've worked, you know, there are groups who are wanting to record this kind of thing in a way that's quite different to what other groups would do. And, you know, we have to be agnostic to that. Our data needs to be agnostic. So from my point of view, we have to be building to best practices, but we're not going to lock people into it. So they get to choose that, and hopefully by exposing what other people think is best practice, we can actually change that conversation. But you know, I'm agnostic. I have to stay away from that until you build templates, and then the rubber hits the road and challenges happen.
Well, let's get a specific example. You might have an archetype for sexual activity, And you might think that it's actually a really good idea to have 2 answers for it for a teenager.
We have one in the London project, but we, on the modelling side, we actually felt very uncomfortable about it. But it was a requirement from the project, difficult. And we haven't put it forward to the international community for that reason. And certainly the value set, we said, we don't want to get into, you know, what's...
So can I just step in a second? So I think we've got a couple of minutes left. This could keep going on. Very interesting, by the way. So I'd just like, the question really is a call to action question, really, for everybody. So I think, Kate, you said something this morning, which was perfect is the enemy of good. And I would say, if you ever put your hand up saying, have we all shared the things that we've learned, the things that we've created, and shared it openly? Partly it's because you don't know the network out there. So today we've got, well, over the period of here, we've had over 280, 290 people. That's a huge community, and everyone's got something special to share. And I think that one of the observations for me, and it's from probably myself, it's not observations, for me, is you have a fear of sharing in case it's critiqued, and it's just a natural behaviour for it. So how do we overcome this as a community, and how can we, as obviously openEHR International network and as international board, how can we help to make sure that sharing is a culture of sharing with a fear of failure?
It's really interesting. It comes back to what you said, Luke, around trust. And I go back and I'm looking at Carlin and I'm laughing and I'm thinking about our clinical co-lead, Chris Moy, who's the ex-president of the Australian Medical Association. And the thing he said to us when we started was, don't be too slick. You're actually going to be more authentic if you're not too slick, if you're not too perfect, if you're not too... Because otherwise it just looks like a veneer and a facade and it doesn't look like you're authentic. And share early, share often, you know, fail fast. And that actually started to build trust in the community because everything's open, everything's transparent. We don't let things get to the point where they're perfect. We put it out there because we want to hear that from our community as well. We want our community to share their early thoughts. And it's... By doing that, by sharing and going on the journey together, and your first thoughts and the first thing might not be the right output, but if you put it up front and you've only spent, 2 days of effort into it and it's not the right thing, it's way better than spending 9 months, 12 months, 18 months of doing something behind and then going out there and then finding it doesn't work. And I think that's been a really powerful thing, and that has really built the trust with our community.
So, I mean, it's an interesting one because there's such a lot of material. Trying to assimilate it is quite difficult. So I think there is a role for this community to pick examples and expose them and start to have discussions about them where new things are being developed. But the reality is, of course, none of us are perfect and we all make mistakes, and sharing what we do with other people is a good way of correcting those mistakes and getting us better. So I think there's value huge value in doing that. And we should operate to minimum levels of openness and transparency. I'm very happy to share anything, and I hope as much as we can is online and available for people. But I think it's about how we act as humans and what we do, and how this community works together to say, actually, that thing that's happening over there, that's really important. Let's bring it here. Let's have a discussion about it. And then being prepared to have that discussion, warts and all.
Great. I think we've run out of time. Heather, do you want a last comment?
Well, I think this is what I'm grappling with at the moment, is how to grow what we're doing and make it more approachable and make it more understandable and get more access and bringing people in, scaling this up, building workforce capacity. We've done what we've done with a fairly small group over a long period of time, and we are now looking at how we broaden that and how we resource it, and it's a massive challenge to do it, but it needs to be done. What Kate's been able to do in a short time, we've got a long way to go to be able to do that, but I aspire to do it, and we have to engage with this community to be able to bring it and make it happen. I'm looking forward to it, but it's not simple.
Okay. Thank you very much. Everyone put your hands together for the panel, please.